On our wedding night, my husband laid a white sheet on the bed. The sheet was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. I noticed it the moment Ryan closed the bedroom door behind us. White, pressed, deliberately placed, with the specific intention of someone who had thought about this in advance and made arrangements. I stood in my wedding dress in the honeymoon suite of a hotel that had cost more than my first car, and I looked at that sheet and understood immediately what it was for, and something in me went very still. Ryan did not look at me when he said it. He picked up the sheet and held it with both hands and said, in the voice of a man reciting something he has rehearsed, that his mother needed to know, that it was important to her, that in their family this was how things were done, and he hoped I would understand. I looked at him for a long moment, then I smiled. Not the smile he was expecting. Not relief. Not compliance. Not the smile of a woman who is going to make this easy. The other kind. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes because it isn't trying to. The kind that a man sees and cannot quite interpret, which unsettles him more than anger would have. I said, "Okay, Ryan. Just that." And I went to the bathroom to change out of my dress, and while I was in there I stood at the mirror and looked at my own face and made myself a promise that I kept every single day of what followed. I was going to be very, very patient. And then I was going to be done being patient. And when that moment came, it was going to be on my terms, in my timing, in front of everyone who needed to see it. I need to tell you about Carol before I tell you anything else. Because Carol is the architecture of this entire story. Everything that happened, the sheet, the years that followed, the morning I finally said what I said, was built on Carol, and what Carol was, and what Carol needed everyone around her to be. Carol was 64 years old, and had spent 64 years arranging the world around the fixed point of her own authority. She was not loud about it. Loud women can be argued with, dismissed, walked away from. Carol was quiet in the specific, devastating way of someone who has learned that quiet is more effective than noise. She spoke in a register of concern, always framed as love. Always framed as love, always delivered with the expression of someone who is only saying this because they care so deeply and would hate for things to go wrong. She had raised Ryan the way certain women raise sons, not to be a man in his own right, but to be an extension of herself. He was 41 years old and still called her every morning, still asked her opinion before making decisions that had nothing to do with her. Still arranged his face into a particular careful expression when her name came up in conversation, the expression of someone navigating a landscape they have learned is not entirely safe. I had seen all of this before I married him. I want to be honest about that. I had seen it, and I had told myself the story that people tell themselves when they want something badly enough. That it would change. That love would shift the balance. That I could work within the structure rather than fighting it. I was a 36-year-old woman with a graduate degree, and a career I had built without anyone's help, and I told myself that story anyway. This is what loneliness does. This is what wanting a family does. It makes you negotiate with things you should not negotiate with, and call it being reasonable. The sheet on the bed was not the beginning. It was just the first thing I could not explain away. We had dated for 2 years before the wedding. In those 2 years, Carol had been present in the specific ways she would be present for the entirety of our marriage. Not constantly visible, not obviously intrusive, but always somehow there. Comment relayed through Ryan. A preference that had somehow become a plan. A question that was not a question, delivered with a smile that was not a smile. She had opinions about where we got engaged. She had opinions about the venue, the guest list, the dress. Not stated directly, never directly, but transmitted through Ryan, in the gentle, persistent way that water transmits through stone. Ryan would come to me with these transmissions already pre-framed as his own thoughts. I was thinking maybe something more traditional, or Mom mentioned she has some family friends who really should be invited. I had learned early that arguing with Ryan about Carol was a specific kind of futile, not because he didn't hear me, because he heard me, and then went to Carol and came back with the same position, restated in slightly different words, and this could go on indefinitely, until I either won by sheer exhaustion or surrendered because the thing in question wasn't worth the cost of the loop. I picked my battles carefully. I surrendered the venue. I surrendered 7 names on the guest list. I kept my dress, my officiant, and my best friend as maid of honor. And I kept these things by simply not discussing them until they were done, and there was nothing to undo. This is what I mean when I say, I had been preparing for a long time. The morning after our wedding night, I woke before Ryan. I lay in the hotel bed in the early light, and I thought about what I was going to do. Not emotionally. I had processed the emotion in the bathroom the night before, standing at the mirror making my promise. I thought about it tactically, the way I think about everything that matters to me. What is the situation? What is the goal? What is the most direct path between them? What obstacles exist, and how are they best addressed? The situation. I had married into a family where the mother-in-law held absolute authority, and the son had never once challenged it. The sheet on the bed was not an isolated incident. It was a statement of terms. It was Carol telling me, through Ryan, through the medium of pressed white linen, that my body and my life and my marriage existed within a framework she had built and continued to oversee. The goal, a marriage that was actually mine. A home that was actually mine. A husband who was, eventually, actually mine. Not in the possessive sense, but in the sense of a man who had located himself as a person separate from his mother, and was capable of standing in that separateness. The obstacle, Carol, and Ryan's 41 years of being managed by her, and the entire family system that had organized itself around her authority so completely that challenging it would look, to everyone inside it, like an act of aggression rather than an act of sanity. I got up. I showered. I dressed. I called my mother, who had raised me alone after my father left when I was 9, who had worked 2 jobs, and never once complained about it in my presence, who had looked at Ryan when I introduced them, and said afterward quietly, "He's kind, Maya. Just make sure he's also strong." My mother, who knew what I was going to tell her before I told her, and who listened without interrupting, and who said when I was done, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Just know that I have a plan." She said, "Then I'm not worried." We moved into the house Ryan had bought 2 years earlier, a house that was, I would discover in increments, not entirely his in the way he seemed to believe. Carol had an opinion about every room. Carol knew where things were kept. Carol had a key, which she used with the comfortable frequency of someone who considers a space theirs, regardless of whose name is on the deed. She came over 4 times in the first week. Each visit was framed as help. She brought food the first time, because of course she did. Food is the most efficient delivery system for presence disguised as generosity. She brought something she wanted to hang on the wall the second time, a family photograph that had apparently always hung in Ryan's various homes, and which she installed in the hallway without asking while I was at work. She came the 3rd time to help Ryan with something in the garage that I was not informed of in advance. The 4th time she arrived, while Ryan was still at work, and sat in my kitchen and drank coffee and talked for 45 minutes about how she hoped I would be happy here and how much this house meant to Ryan, and how Ryan needed a certain kind of stability in his home life. And she hoped I understood what she meant by that. I understood exactly what she meant by that. I poured her more coffee and I nodded. And I said all the appropriate things. And I added everything she said to the count. I was keeping in the back of my mind the quiet, running tally of Carol's movements and methods, and the specific vocabulary she used to mean things she was not saying directly. By the end of the first month, I could have written her a manual. Ryan was not oblivious. This is the thing I want to be precise about, because it would be easier, for him, in the story he told himself, if he had simply not seen it. But he saw it. He saw Carol's fourth visit that week, saw me in the kitchen afterward, with my coffee cup, and my careful expression, saw the particular quality of my silence and interpreted it correctly. He said, "She means well." I said, "I know." He said, "She's just involved. She's always been involved. It's how she is." I said, "I know, Ryan." He waited for me to say more. When I didn't, he seemed relieved, which told me something important. He was not looking for a resolution. He was looking for the absence of conflict. He had learned, growing up inside Carol's management, to equate the absence of conflict with everything being fine. Because Carol had never allowed actual conflict, and so he had no experience of the thing that comes after it. The clearing, the honesty, possibility of something more real. I did not give him conflict that evening. I was saving it. The thing Carol did best was the slow reframe. Over months, she repositioned things so gradually that the repositioning was almost invisible. My way of doing something became the subject of a gentle suggestion, which became a mild concern, which became a quiet assumption that the thing would now be done differently. My preferences in the house became negotiations. My relationship with Ryan became something she was present in. Not intrusively, never obviously, but present the way a third voice is present in a conversation between two people, when one of them keeps referencing it. Mom thinks we should do Christmas at her place this year. Mom mentioned she was a little hurt that we didn't ask her about the furniture. Mom said she noticed you seemed stressed lately. Is everything okay? That last one was the most sophisticated because it used concern as a surveillance tool. Carol had noticed I seemed stressed. Carol was worried. Carol wanted to make sure everything was okay. And Ryan, delivering this message, was watching me to see how I responded to being noticed, which was itself a kind of test. I said everything was fine. I smiled. I went upstairs and added it to the count. By the end of the first year, I had documented everything. Not in a dramatic way. Not with the self-conscious awareness of someone building a legal case. Just the habit of a precise person who does not trust her own memory as much as she trusts a written record. Dates. What was said. How it was framed. What it meant underneath the framing. The photograph in the hallway. The 4 visits in 1 week. The Christmas that happened at Carol's because Ryan had already told her yes before mentioning it to me. The birthday dinner where Carol had ordered for me at the restaurant. Because she knew what I liked, which I had not told her, and which Ryan apparently had, without asking me if I wanted her to know. The document was 43 pages by the end of the year. I printed it. I put it in a folder. I put the folder somewhere Carol would never find it, which was not difficult because Carol, for all her presence in our home, had one blind spot. She did not believe I was a serious threat. She had assessed me in the first weeks. I could feel the assessment happening. The way you feel weather changing, and she had arrived at a conclusion that I had done nothing to correct. She thought I was manageable. She thought I was the kind of woman who needed to be liked, who would keep the peace, because peace felt safer than its alternative. She was wrong about that. She was wrong because she had never had to build something from nothing. Because her authority had always been structural, not inherited from the role of mother, never earned in the way that authority is earned when no one gives it to you, and you have to locate it in yourself. She did not know what I was made of, because she had never needed to find out. I let her not find out. For a year, I let her believe what she believed. The morning I changed everything began, the way all significant mornings begin. Quietly, with coffee, with the ordinary sounds of a house waking up. Ryan was in the shower. Carol was coming for brunch, as she did most Sundays. Because Sunday brunch had become a fixture of our week, in the way that Carol's fixtures became fixtures. Gradually, without a formal agreement, until the absence of them would have felt like a disruption. Deanne, Ryan's sister, was also coming. Gerald, his father, who had perfected over decades the art of being physically present, while occupying as little space as possible, would sit in the corner chair and eat and contribute nothing to any conversation that mattered. I set the table. I made coffee. I thought about the white sheet folded at the foot of the hotel bed on our wedding night. I thought about the 43-page document in its folder. I thought about the year of patience and precision, and keeping the count and waiting for the right moment, with the particular discipline of someone who understands that timing is not incidental. It is the whole thing, I thought. Today they arrived at 11, Carol first, because Carol was always first. She had the specific habit of early arrival that is less about punctuality, and more about establishing presence before anyone else can establish theirs. She came in with a dish she had made. Something she set on the counter with the practiced ease of a woman in her own kitchen, and she kissed Ryan on the cheek and looked at the table I had set, and made one small adjustment to the placement of a fork, without commenting on it, which was itself a comment. Diane came 10 minutes later with Gerald, who nodded at me and went to his chair. I brought out the food. I poured the coffee. I sat down. And I was warm and I was pleasant. And I participated in the conversation. With the ease of someone who has been doing this for a year and has become fluent in the particular dialect of this family's Sunday mornings. Carol talked about a neighbor. Diane talked about her kids. Ryan talked about something at work. Gerald ate. I waited the moment came, as moments do, not dramatically, but in the small gap between one topic ending and another beginning. A few seconds of quiet while Diane reached for the coffee pot. I set my own cup down, and I looked at Ryan, and then I looked at Carol, and I said, in the same voice I use for everything, calm, clear, completely without heat. I'd like to talk about something before we finish. Carol looked at me with the expression she used when she was deciding how to manage something. Pleasant. Attentive. Already working. I said, Ryan and I are moving into our own place. Separate from this house, with new boundaries around how our home works. I've found a property and I'd like us to move within 60 days. 3 words had become a sentence, but the 3 words were in there. Separate house now. Everything else was just the structure, around them. The table was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday morning. The other kind. Carol recovered first. She always recovered first. This was one of her skills, the rapid reassembly of composure after something unexpected. She smiled and said she wasn't sure she understood, that this house was perfectly suitable, that she didn't see why. I said, I'm not asking for input on the decision, I'm informing you of it. Ryan was looking at me with an expression I had not seen from him before. Something had shifted in his face while I was speaking. Not the familiar discomfort of a man caught between 2 women, but something more foundational, like a man hearing a language he had not known existed and discovering that he understood it. Carol said, Ryan, surely. Ryan said. Let her finish. 2 words from him, but I heard what was in them. Carol heard it too. I saw the micro-adjustment in her expression. The fraction of a second, where the management recalibrated for a new variable. She turned to me with the warmth dialed up, concerned version. The I just want, what's best for everyone version, she said. Maya, sweetheart, I hope this isn't about anything I've done. If I've made you feel. I opened my bag and I put the folder on the table. Not all 43 pages. A summary. 8 pages, organized clearly, covering the photograph, the key, the 4 visits in 1 week, the Christmas, the birthday dinner, the morning coffee with its 45 minutes of framing and subtext, 12 months of the smaller things, dated and specific. I said, this is a record of the last year. I kept it because I believe in having accurate information when having important conversations. I'd like everyone at this table to understand that my decision is not impulsive, and it is not personal. It is a response to a pattern that has been consistent since our wedding night. Diane picked up the summary. She started reading. Her face changed in the slow, uncomfortable way of someone recognizing something they had half known and chosen to look past. Gerald looked at his plate. Carol looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before. Not warmth, not management, not the fluent performance of concerned love. Just a woman who has been in control of a room for 40 years. Sitting across from the first person who had ever made her feel the room shifting. Ryan read the summary after Diane put it down. He read it slowly, which was not how Ryan usually read things. He turned pages carefully. He went back to 1 page and read something twice. He set it down, and he did not say anything for a moment, and the silence in that moment was different from any silence I had heard from him in the year of our marriage. He said, I didn't know you were keeping track. I said, I keep track of things that matter to me. He said, why didn't you tell me? I said, because every time I tried to tell you something, Ryan, it came back to me reframed. I would say something about your mother, and it would become a conversation about how I was perceiving things, or how she meant well, or how I needed to be patient. I was not going to spend our marriage having that conversation on repeat. So I waited until I had something you couldn't reframe. I gestured at the folder. That is something you can't reframe. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He looked at Carol. Carol said, Ryan, I think what Maya is feeling. Ryan said, Mom, stop. The room absorbed this. I watched Carol absorb it. I watched the thing it cost her to sit in that chair with her son's stop hanging in the air between them. Unretracted, unmollified. She had been in control of this man's responses for 41 years. And she sat across from his stop and had nothing to do with it. Diane said something that I had not expected. She put down her coffee cup and she looked at her mother and she said, she's right. Carol turned. I've watched this for a year, Mom. I've watched you come over here and adjust things and manage things. And I told myself it was just you being you, and it wasn't fair to Maya. And I didn't say anything. Diane's voice was steady, in the way voices are steady when someone has decided to say something they cannot take back, and has made their peace with not taking it back. The birthday dinner. I was there. You ordered for her. She hadn't been at the table 2 minutes and you ordered for her and I didn't say anything. Carol said, I know what you were just doing. Diane looked at me. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I nodded. Thank you. This is the thing about building a case carefully over a year. You cannot predict who becomes your witness. You prepare for opposition and you move forward anyway, and sometimes the room configures itself in ways you did not plan for. Ryan and I found the house 3 weeks later. It was 22 minutes from Carol's. which I had calculated as the distance that was far enough to require intention, and close enough not to be a declaration of war. Ryan had been quiet in the days after the brunch, not the uncomfortable quiet of avoidance, but a different kind, the quality of a man doing something interior that he had not done before. He said one evening, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Tell me what you're apologizing for." He thought about this. He did not rush it. "For making you keep a 43-page document, instead of feeling safe enough to just talk to me. For using 'she means well' as a way to not have to deal with it. For the sheet on the wedding night." Or paused. I didn't have the courage to tell her no. I was afraid of what she'd do with it. I've been afraid of that my whole life, and I handed you the consequences of my fear. I said. "I know," he said. "Is it enough?" I looked at him. "It's a start. We set the terms before we moved. I want to be specific about this because the terms were not punishment. They were not the product of bitterness or the desire to diminish Carol, who I had never hated and did not hate now. They were simply the honest articulation of what our marriage needed to function as a marriage rather than a subsidiary of someone else's household. Carol would call before coming over, not a notification sent while already in the car. A call, at least 24 hours in advance, to which we would respond with yes or not this time, and not this time was a complete sentence requiring no explanation. Carol would not have a key to our new home. Decisions about our home, our schedule, our life would be made between Ryan and me, and if Carol had thoughts about those decisions, she could share them with Ryan, who would decide whether to bring them to our conversation. And that decision was his to make, without consulting her first. Christmas would alternate. Our way, her way, our way, her way, and our way included the possibility of not having Christmas with extended family at all, which was an option we had apparently never had before, and which I exercised in our very first year in the new house, when we spent December 25th at home. Just the two of us, and it was the best Christmas I had ever had. Carol received these terms from Ryan. He delivered them himself, which was important. Not because I could not have delivered them, but because this was his work to do, and doing it himself was the evidence that the apology had been real. She did not take them well immediately. There were phone calls. There was a period of wounded withdrawal that lasted 3 weeks and was, I suspect, designed to produce the response it had always produced in Ryan. The anxious reaching out, the reassurance, the walking back of whatever had caused the withdrawal. Ryan did not walk anything back. He called her after 3 weeks and told her he loved her, and that the terms stood and that he hoped they could find a way to be family within them. She came to Sunday brunch at our new house 6 weeks after we moved in. She called 23 hours in advance. She did not bring a dish without asking if she should bring a dish. She sat at a table I had set without adjusting the placement of anything. It was not comfortable. It was not the performance of warmth she had always deployed so fluently, because the performance had an audience now that could see it clearly and she knew it. But she came. And she called ahead, and she did not touch the fork. There is something I want to say about the smirk. The one on my wedding night, when Ryan held the sheet and said what he said. And I looked at him and smiled the smile that didn't reach my eyes. I have thought about that smirk a great deal in the time since. What it contained. What I knew in that moment that I could not have articulated yet. I think what I knew was this, that the sheet was not about me. It was Carol's last assertion of ownership over a son she was about to, in the traditional sense, on to someone else. And she could not hand him without first establishing that the handing was on her terms. That even the most intimate fact of his marriage was something she would verify and sanction. and I smirked because I understood, in that moment, that I was not going to be verified or sanctioned by anyone. Not then. Not in 43 pages of documentation. Not in the brunch where I set the folder on the table. Not in the terms we negotiated, or the new house, or the Christmas we spent alone, or any Sunday morning that would come after. I was not someone whose validity required confirmation. I had known this about myself for a long time. The smirk was just me remembering it, in a hotel room on my wedding night, before I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror and made myself a promise. I kept it. That is the whole story. The white sheet, by the way, was washed with the rest of the hotel linens and presumably made someone else's bed. I never asked Carol what conclusion she drew from it. Some questions answer themselves by becoming irrelevant. Ryan calls his mother on Sunday mornings. From our kitchen, with the door open, while I drink my coffee. He makes the coffee now. He learned how I take it. It took him a while. He got there.